The June afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Riverside Country Club in suburban Chicago, casting golden rays across the elegant reception hall. White tablecloths adorned with lavender centerpieces created a picture-perfect setting for my niece Sarah's wedding. The laughter of family members filled the air as they celebrated the union of Sarah and her new husband, Michael. I sat quietly at table 7, nursing a glass of water and watching the joy unfold around me at 32. I had grown accustomed to being the quiet one at family gatherings. While my cousins discussed their corporate promotions, new cars, and suburban homes, I usually found myself listening rather than contributing. It wasn't that I had nothing to say, quite the opposite, actually. I simply preferred to keep certain chapters of my life private, especially during celebratory occasions like this one. "Danny, there you are," my Aunt Linda approached with her characteristic warm smile, her silver hair perfectly styled for the occasion. She had always been kind to me, even during my rougher years after returning from overseas. "You look handsome in that suit. Navy blue really suits you." "Thank you, Aunt Linda." "Sarah looks absolutely beautiful today," I replied, gesturing toward my niece, who was dancing with her father, my older brother Mark. The sight of them together brought a genuine smile to my face. Mark had done an incredible job raising Sarah as a single father after his divorce 5 years ago. He really does. "Mark must be so proud," Aunt Linda said, following my gaze. "You know, Danny, I've been meaning to ask, how are things going with you? Are you still working at the warehouse?" The question didn't sting the way it used to. I had learned to accept that people meant well, even when their inquiries felt loaded with assumptions about my life choices. "Yes, ma'am. Still there. It pays the bills, and I like the work." It was a simple answer, but it was honest. The physical labor helped me stay grounded, and my colleagues respected the fact that I showed up every day, worked hard, and didn't complain. Before Aunt Linda could respond, my cousin Derek appeared beside us, his expensive cologne announcing his presence before his voice did. Derek was everything I wasn't successful in his own estimation, loud and always eager to be the center of attention. His real estate business had flourished over the past few years, and he never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of his achievements. Well, if it isn't my favorite cousin," Derek said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was already on his 3rd or 4th drink, judging by the slight slur in his words and the flush in his cheeks. "Danny boy, still living the dream, I see. Warehouse work must be really fulfilling." I felt my jaw tighten slightly, but I kept my expression neutral. "It has its moments, Derek. Congratulations on the Miller account, by the way. I heard you closed that deal last month." I had learned that deflecting his jabs with genuine acknowledgement of his successes often diffused his need to belittle others. Derek's eyebrows raised in surprise. He clearly hadn't expected me to know about his business dealings. "Thanks, man. Yeah, that was a big one. 7 figures. He took another sip of his whiskey before continuing. "You know, I've been thinking about you lately. We're all getting older, settling down, building something real. Don't you think it's time you figured out what you want to do with your life?" The conversation was taking a familiar turn, and I could see Aunt Linda shifting uncomfortably beside us. Family gatherings often became stages for Derek to perform his superiority complex, and I had become his favorite target over the years. Not because I fought back, quite the opposite. My silence seemed to encourage him, as if my lack of defensiveness confirmed whatever narrative he had constructed about my life. "Doing just fine, Derek." "Really?" My voice remained calm, but I could feel the familiar tension building in my shoulders. It was the same feeling I used to get during patrol in Fallujah. When something didn't feel quite right, you couldn't put your finger on exactly what was wrong. The reception continued around us as Derek's liquid courage grew bolder. The DJ had just announced that it was time for the best man's speech, and the room began to settle as guests turned their attention toward the head table. Derek, however, seemed oblivious to the timing. "Just fine?" Derek laughed, the sound carrying further than he probably intended. "Danny, you're 32, and you're still figuring things out. Most of us had our acts together by look around this room." He gestured broadly, his drink sloshing slightly. "Everyone here has built something real. It's careers, families, futures." I could feel eyes beginning to turn toward our conversation. Aunt Linda placed a gentle hand on my arm, perhaps sensing the tension that was building. "Derek, maybe this isn't the time," she began, but he cut her off with a wave of his hand. No, it's fine. Danny and I are family. We can talk honestly, right?" He turned back to me, his smile taking on a sharper edge. "I'm just saying, man, at some point you have to stop drifting and start living. The warehouse thing was fine for a while, but come on, you've got to have bigger dreams than that." The best man had begun his speech, but I could tell that several family members were now listening to our conversation instead. My cousin Jennifer shot me a sympathetic look from across the room, while my Uncle Robert frowned in Derek's direction. The atmosphere was shifting, and not in a good way. "Derek, I appreciate your concern, but I'm happy with my choices," I said quietly, hoping to end the conversation before it escalated further. "Today's about Sarah and Michael. Let's focus on celebrating them. See, that's what I'm talking about." Derek's voice rose slightly, causing more heads to turn. "You're always deflecting, always avoiding the real questions. It's like you're afraid to admit that you don't have a plan. And that's okay, man, but at least be honest about it." I could feel my heart rate increasing, not from anger, but from the familiar discomfort of being the center of unwanted attention. In combat, being noticed could get you killed. In civilian life, it just made you wish you could disappear. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had spent years in situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Yet I struggled to navigate the politics of family gatherings. Mark finished his dance with Sarah and began walking toward our table, having apparently noticed the commotion. His expression suggested he was not pleased with what he was seeing. As Sarah's father and the host of this celebration, he had every right to expect his family to behave appropriately. "Everything okay over here?" Mark asked as he approached, his tone polite but firm. He was still wearing his father-of-a-bride smile, but I could see the warning in his eyes as he looked at Derek. "Oh, everything's great," Derek replied with exaggerated enthusiasm. "I was just trying to give our boy Danny here some career advice. You know how it is, family, looking out for family." Mark's smile faltered slightly. "Derek, today is my daughter's wedding day. Maybe we could save the career counseling for another time." But Derek was past the point of reading social cues. The alcohol had amplified his natural tendency toward tactlessness, and he seemed determined to make his point. "Come on, Mark. Don't you think it's time someone had an honest conversation with him? He's your brother. Don't you want to see him succeed?" The best man had finished his speech, and the applause that followed seemed to highlight the uncomfortable silence that had formed around our table. I could feel the weight of multiple conversations, and I knew that Derek was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The reception hall had returned to its celebratory buzz, but the tension at our table continued to thicken. Derek, emboldened by alcohol and seemingly oblivious to the social cues around him, pressed forward with his unwelcome commentary on my life choices. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean here," Derek continued, his voice carrying to nearby tables. "But we're all adults, and sometimes adults need to hear hard truths. Danny, you're a smart guy, but you're wasting your potential. Working in a warehouse, living in that little apartment, no girlfriend, no real prospects, Derek, that's enough." Mark's voice carried a warning that would have stopped most people. But Derek was too intoxicated by his own perceived righteousness to notice. "No, hear me out. I care about Danny. We all do. But caring means being honest." Derek turned to face me directly, his eyes slightly unfocused, but his intention clear. "When was the last time you had a real goal? When was the last time you pushed yourself to be better? You're like a ghost man, just floating through life without any real purpose." The words hit harder than Derek probably intended, not because they were true, but because they echoed thoughts I'd wrestled with during my darkest moments after returning from deployment. The accusation of being purposeless stung in ways that Derek couldn't possibly understand. "I have purpose," I said quietly, my hands resting flat on the white tablecloth. "You just don't see it." "Oh yeah, what is it then?" Derek's challenge carried across the table, and I noticed that conversations at nearby tables had grown quieter. People were listening now, whether they wanted to or not. I remained silent. Not because I couldn't answer, but because the answer wasn't something I shared casually at family gatherings. How do you explain to someone that your purpose is simply making it through each day with your humanity intact? How do you describe the satisfaction of honest work when you've seen what dishonest work can do to the world? Derek interpreted my silence as confirmation of his point. See, that's what I'm talking about. Can't even answer the question because there is no answer. You're just ... drifting. A 32-year-old drifter. The word drifter seemed to hang in the air, and I could feel the eyes of family members I'd known my entire life studying my reaction. Some looked sympathetic, others embarrassed by Derek's behavior, but all were waiting to see how this would resolve. Derek, you need to stop this right now, Aunt Linda said firmly, her earlier politeness replaced by maternal authority. This is neither the time nor the place. But Derek was beyond reason now, riding the wave of his own perceived moral superiority. You know what the real problem is? Everyone here has been tiptoeing around Danny for years, treating him like he's fragile or something. But that's not helping him. What helps people is honest feedback. He stood up slightly in his chair, gesturing broadly enough that his movement caught the attention of even more guests. The bride and groom were still dancing, thankfully oblivious to the drama unfolding at table 7. But I could see other family members beginning to notice the disturbance. Look around this room, Danny. Really look. Your cousin Jennifer. Just made partner at her law firm. Uncle Robert's son is finishing medical school. My business is thriving. Even the younger cousins are in college, working towards something. And here you are, the family. He paused, seeming to search for the most cutting word possible. ... Loser. The word loser seemed to echo in the sudden quiet that followed. It was as if Derek had finally said the thing that everyone else had been too polite to voice. And the relief of having it spoken aloud was palpable. Or perhaps it was just the shock of hearing such cruelty delivered so casually at a wedding reception. I felt something inside me shift. Not toward anger, but toward a kind of resigned sadness. Not for myself, but for Derek and for the family. Members who were now witnessing this moment, this was how they would remember Sarah's wedding day, not just as a celebration of love, but as the day one family member publicly humiliated another for sport. The silence that followed Derek's declaration stretched uncomfortably across our section of the reception hall. I could see the shock on Aunt Linda's face, the growing anger in Mark's expression, and the uncomfortable fidgeting of other family members who had been drawn into this unwanted drama. Derek himself seemed suddenly aware that he had crossed a line, but his pride prevented him from backing down. I didn't mean it like that, Derek said, though his tone suggested he meant exactly that. I just think no. Mark's voice cut through Derek's attempted backpedal with the authority of someone who had reached his limit. You don't get to do this. Not today. Not to my brother. Mark stood up from his chair, his formal wedding attire somehow making him appear more imposing rather than less. The transformation from gracious host to protective older brother was immediate and unmistakable. Other conversations in our vicinity had stopped entirely now, creating a pocket of tense silence in the otherwise celebratory atmosphere. Derek, you want to talk about accomplishments? Mark's voice carried clearly but wasn't loud enough to disrupt the entire reception. You want to talk about purpose and direction? Let me tell you something about my brother that he's too humble to mention himself. I felt my stomach drop. Mark was about to venture into territory that I had spent years keeping private. Not out of shame, but out of a desire to move forward, rather than live in the past. Mark, don't I started, but he held up a hand. No, Danny, you've been quiet long enough. Mark looked directly at Derek, his expression serious. You want to know what my brother was doing while you were in college? Learning how to sell houses? He was serving 3 combat tours with the United States Marine Corps, Fallujah Helmand Province, and Kandahar. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Derek's expression shifted from defensive smugness to something approaching shock. Aunt Linda's hand flew to her mouth, and I could hear similar gasps from nearby tables as Mark's words carried further than he probably intended. That's right, Mark continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. While you were worried about grades and fraternity parties, Danny was leading Marines in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. He's got a Bronze Star with a V4, Valor, a Purple Heart, and a Combat Action Ribbon. But he doesn't talk about it because he doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the familiar weight of unwanted attention, but this time it was different. Instead of judgment or pity, I could sense something else in the atmosphere around our table: respect, and perhaps a new understanding of why I prefer to keep certain aspects of my life private. The warehouse job? Mark wasn't finished. Chose that because he wanted honest work with good people. The small apartment. He sends half his paycheck to the widow of one of his Marines who didn't make it home. The reason he doesn't talk about his future plans? Because he's too busy taking care of other people to worry about impressing anyone. Derek had gone completely silent. His earlier bravado evaporated. The alcohol was still in his system, but the shock of Mark's revelation had apparently sobered him in ways that coffee never could. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes as he tried to reconcile the person. He thought he knew what the reality Mark had just presented. Danny never talks about his service because he doesn't think of himself as a hero, Mark continued, his voice softening slightly. But I do, and so does everyone who knows the real story. Hey, so before you call someone a loser, maybe you should consider that you might not know the whole story. The silence that followed was different from the uncomfortable quiet that had preceded it. This was a respectful silence, the kind that follows a revelation that changes everyone's understanding of a situation. I could feel the shift in the room, the way people were looking at me now, not with pity or judgment, but with something approaching admiration. Finally, Derek found his voice, though it was much quieter than before. Danny, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the arrogant cousin who had just humiliated me, but a man who had made a mistake and was now grappling with the consequences of his assumptions. It's okay, Derek. You couldn't have known. I don't advertise it. But why? Derek asked. And for the first time all evening, his question seemed genuine rather than challenging. Why keep something like that private? I considered how to answer, aware that our conversation was still being listened to by family members who were probably wondering the same thing. Because it's not who I am now, I said finally. It's something I did, something I'm proud of, but it's not the sum total of who I am. I prefer to let my current actions speak for themselves. Mark sat back down, his protective duty apparently complete. The reception was beginning to return to its normal volume around us, but I could tell that word was spreading through the family about what had just been revealed. I would probably spend the rest of the evening answering questions and receiving thanks from relatives who had never known about my military service. Derek looked down at his drink, then pushed it away from himself. I feel like an idiot, he said quietly. Don't, I replied. Just, maybe next time, consider that everyone has a story you might not know about.